The Anderson Foundation increased their donation to $5 million, I mentioned to Ryan as I slid the charity gala invitation across our kitchen island. They're honoring your department this year. My husband glanced up from his coffee, his expression brightening with that camera-ready smile that had first caught my attention at a mutual friend's wedding 7 years ago. Perfect timing. Their CEO just approved that new policy package last week. I studied Ryan's face as he examined the invitation. Ryan Miller, Executive Vice President at Pacific Northwest Insurance, always impeccably dressed in tailored suits. His salt and pepper hair precisely styled, exuding the confidence that came with his corner office and seven-figure bonus. The man I'd married after a whirlwind romance that had surprised even my closest friends. Speaking of timing, Ryan continued, refilling his artisanal coffee mug. I've been thinking about your grandmother's house. The market's absolutely peaked. In that neighborhood, we should seriously consider selling while prices are this high. I paused, my hand hovering over my laptop. The Craftsman Bungalow in Portland's historic Laurelhurst district wasn't just any property. It had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandmother had left it to me specifically, knowing how much I cherished the hand-carved woodwork and stained glass windows I'd helped her maintain throughout my childhood. That's not something I'm interested in, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. We've discussed this before. That house stays in the family. Ryan nodded, his expression understanding but persistent. Just thinking financially, Jess. That equity sitting unused when we could reinvest it in something with better returns. But it's your call, of course. What Ryan didn't know was that I'd already noticed concerning patterns in our shared accounts. Small, unusual transfers that didn't match our typical spending habits. Notification settings mysteriously changed. Investment documents I couldn't recall signing. I'm heading to lunch with Emma, I said, closing my laptop. We're finalizing the charity auction details. Give Emma my best, Ryan replied, suddenly attentive. I've got meetings all afternoon anyway. Don't wait up tonight. Strategy session with the executive team might run late. I maintained my practiced smile, the same one I'd perfected through years of high-stakes financial fraud investigations at Westlake Financial Group, where I specialized in detecting sophisticated embezzlement schemes. The same analytical skills that had made me an asset to the company were now alerting me that something wasn't right in my own home. Instead of meeting Emma for lunch, I drove to my grandmother's bungalow, parking a block away as an unfamiliar tension filled my chest. I hadn't planned this detour, but something was pulling me here today. The same instinct that had helped me uncover complex financial deceptions throughout my career. As I approached, I noticed an unfamiliar luxury SUV parked in the driveway. Through the large front window, I could see a well-dressed couple walking through the living room, admiring the original hardwood floors I'd spent a summer refinishing after college. Behind them stood Natalie Brooks, one of Portland's most prominent luxury real estate agents, gesturing enthusiastically toward the handcrafted built-in bookcases. My stomach dropped as I quickly moved out of sight, pulling out my phone to snap photos from behind a mature rhododendron. This was the second showing this week according to the security system notifications I'd been receiving. Notifications Ryan believed I'd disabled when we upgraded our smart home system last month. My phone vibrated with a text from my colleague, Jackson. Records confirmed deed transfer filed Tuesday. Signature verification underway. My hands trembled slightly as I returned to my car. Somehow, Ryan had managed to sell my family home, or at least was in the process of selling it. The property that wasn't even jointly owned, the house that was specifically excluded from our prenuptial agreement. Driving toward downtown, I called the one person I knew would understand both the legal and personal implications. Emma Chen answered on the second ring, her voice shifting from professional to concerned as soon as she heard mine. Emma, it's Jess. Are you available right now? It's important. 20 minutes later, I sat in Emma's private office at Chen & Associates. Legal. The documents I'd hastily gathered spread across her polished conference table. Emma listened intently, her expression growing increasingly troubled as I explained what I'd discovered. Forgery, Emma stated flatly, examining the transfer paperwork I'd had Jackson send over. And sophisticated identity theft. Ryan would need access to your personal documents, digital signatures, notary connections. All of which he has, I replied quietly. I trusted him completely. Emma's eyes, sharp after 15 years of real estate law practice, studied my face. What do you need from me, Jess? Time, I answered. And discretion. I need to understand how deep this goes before I confront him. As I left Emma's office, another text from Jackson appeared. Offshore account identified. Transfers dating back 6 months. Multiple properties involved. Meeting at your office at 4 a.m. to review findings. I took a deep breath, slipping my phone into my purse as I prepared to return home. The weight of my wedding ring suddenly felt suffocating against my finger. 7 years of building a life with someone, only to discover it had all been an elaborate deception. In my car, I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, composing my features into a mask of blissful ignorance. I would play the unsuspecting wife a little longer, just long enough to uncover the full extent of Ryan's betrayal and ensure he never saw the retribution coming. After all, he might be an insurance executive with powerful connections, but I was Jessica Miller, who had built a career uncovering complex financial fraud. I knew exactly how to follow money trails that others tried to hide. Ryan had no idea who he was really dealing with, but he was about to find out. I arrived at my office precisely at 4, having texted Ryan that my lunch with Emma had extended into an impromptu shopping trip for the charity gala. His reply had been immediate and predictable. Perfect timing. Tonight's strategy session might run until midnight. Don't wait up. Jackson Lee had been my investigative partner on numerous financial fraud cases. A former forensic accountant for the SEC, he now specialized in tracing sophisticated money laundering operations. The identity theft is remarkably thorough, Jackson began without preamble as I entered our secure conference room. Ryan created digital duplicates of your signature starting approximately 7 months ago, beginning with minor documents. My throat tightened. 7 months ago, right after I'd received the substantial performance bonus that we'd celebrated with a weekend getaway to the coast. Show me everything, I instructed, taking the seat beside him. For the next 2 hours, Jackson methodically revealed Ryan's elaborate scheme. Multiple shell companies created in Nevada and Wyoming, a sophisticated network of transactions moving money through increasingly obscure channels, falsified powers of attorney, and most disturbingly, a pattern of similar activities that predated our relationship. He's done this before, I said quietly, staring at the evidence of at least 2 previous marriages that had ended with significant property transfers. Jackson nodded grimly. Melanie Ward in Seattle, Stephanie Collins in Denver, both successful professionals with significant assets or inheritances. Both marriages lasted approximately 5 years. And both women? I asked, already suspecting the answer. Ward suffered a complete professional breakdown, resigned from her executive position, later filed for bankruptcy. Collins fought back legally, but the documentation appeared ironclad. She lost everything in legal fees before eventually settling. I scrolled through the financial trails, recognizing the sophisticated layering that kept Ryan's name officially disconnected from the transactions while ensuring he ultimately controlled the proceeds. What about the offshore accounts? I asked. Jackson pulled up another screen. Cayman Islands initially, then Singapore, currently routing through a structure in Liechtenstein. We've identified approximately $7 million in holdings. Mind reeled. The bungalow was worth nearly $1, $2 million in today's market. Where had the other $5 million come from? There's more, Jackson continued. He's been systematically accessing your client files at Westlake Financial. Most recently, the Thompson Foundation and Riverfront Development accounts. The same high-value clients I'd mentioned in passing conversations at home. The timing of Ryan's renewed interest in selling the bungalow suddenly made perfect sense. He needed to secure these assets before I discovered the theft of my family home. The Thompson Foundation audit is scheduled for next month, I murmured. Riverfront's tax restructuring finalizes in 60 days. Combined liquidity of approximately $12 million. I rose and paced the conference room, my analytical mind automatically cataloging potential charges, jurisdictional issues, and recovery strategies. But beneath the professional assessment, a cold fury was building. There's something else you should see, Jackson said quietly, pulling up surveillance footage. This is from your grandmother's house yesterday afternoon. The video showed Ryan giving a personal tour to Natalie Brooks and an older man I didn't recognize. Ryan moved through my family home with proprietary confidence, pointing out original features. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Discussing renovation potential as if he'd personally overseen the maintenance I'd dedicated years to completing. Who's the man? I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Victor Harlow, property developer, known for purchasing historic properties, gutting them, and building modern luxury homes. The final piece clicked into place. Ryan wasn't just stealing my house, he was planning to destroy it. I need copies of everything, I said, returning to my seat. And I need to know who else is involved. Ryan couldn't have managed all the legal documentation himself, even with digital forgeries. Jackson pulled up another file. We've identified a paralegal at Westbrook Legal who processed most of the paperwork, Thomas Brooks. Natalie Brooks's husband, I realized. They're working together. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. Breakthrough with executive team. Staying downtown tonight. Talk tomorrow. Love you. I stared at the message, a plan already forming. Ryan had given me the perfect opportunity. I need immediate access to our house, I told Jackson. Tonight. Jackson raised an eyebrow. You're not confronting him yet? No, I replied, gathering my notes. First, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with, and I need to secure what's mine before he realizes I know. As I prepared to leave, Jackson asked the question that had been hanging between us. What's your endgame here, Jess? Criminal charges? Civil suit? I paused at the door, thinking of the two women whose lives Ryan had previously destroyed. Of my grandmother's carefully preserved home, now destined for demolition. Of the trust I'd placed in the man I'd married. Justice, I answered simply. Complete and inescapable justice. Outside, twilight had fallen over Portland, the city lights beginning to twinkle against the darkening sky. I checked my appearance in my car's mirror, ensuring no trace of my discoveries showed on my face. For the next few days, I would need to maintain the illusion of the unsuspecting wife while I executed the first phase of my counterattack. After all, Ryan wasn't just committing fraud against me. He was attempting it against some of the wealthiest clients in the Pacific Northwest, clients under my professional care. He had no idea that in targeting me, he'd chosen an adversary uniquely positioned to destroy him. The security system in our Lake Oswego home beeped softly as I entered. The space dark except for the ambient landscape lighting filtering through, floor-to-ceiling windows. I moved silently through our shared home, now seeing it through entirely new eyes. No longer as our space, but as Ryan's staged backdrop. I headed directly to his home office, the one room he'd insisted remain his. Private domain. Client confidentiality, he'd explained when we'd bought the house, and I'd respected that boundary. Until now. The office door featured a biometric lock, but I'd prepared for this. From my purse, I extracted a silicone cast of Ryan's right thumbprint, created from a wine glass he'd used at dinner last week. back when I'd first noticed the suspicious account notifications and begun taking precautions. The lock clicked open. Inside, the minimalist space reflected Ryan's carefully curated image. Expensive yet understated furniture, abstract art selected by the designer he'd hired, credentials displayed just prominently enough to impress without seeming ostentatious. I went straight to his desk, powering on his secondary laptop, the one he believed I didn't know existed. The password prompt appeared, but Jackson had already provided me with the keystroke capture data from the spyware he'd installed remotely yesterday. While the computer booted up, I methodically photographed the contents of his desk drawers. Filing cabinet and safe, combination acquired months ago when Ryan mumbled it in his sleep. Everything appeared meticulously organized, almost too perfect, like his entire persona. The laptop yielded immediate results. Unlike his primary computer, this one contained the real records of his operation. Spreadsheets tracking assets targeted, timeline projections, communications with accomplices. I connected an encrypted drive and began copying everything. A folder labeled JM Properties contained detailed files not just on my grandmother's bungalow, but on several other family properties I'd inherited. Smaller investments my parents had purchased before their accident, properties I rarely discussed that weren't publicly connected to me. "How did you know about these?" I whispered, scrolling through detailed valuation assessments. The answer appeared in another folder. JM Communications, my emails, text messages, phone logs, all meticulously archived and annotated. He'd been monitoring me from the beginning, harvesting every casual mention of family assets, every professional connection, every potential resource. My hands trembled slightly, but I continued methodically documenting everything I found. In a hidden partition, I discovered the template documents used for creating falsified powers of attorney, property transfers, and financial authorizations, complete with progressively refined versions of my digital signature. In his physical safe, behind investment statements and insurance policies, I found a USB drive containing what appeared to be his contingency plans, exit strategies, identity documents, and overseas contact information. Most disturbing were files on his previous targets, Melanie and Stephanie, containing intimate photographs, personal journals, and psychological assessments. He hadn't just stolen their assets, he'd studied them, learned their vulnerabilities, customized his approach to each woman. My phone vibrated with a text from Emma. "Brooks meeting Harlow tomorrow morning. Demolition permits already being prepared." They were moving quickly. Too quickly. Another text followed from Jackson. "Ryan's primary phone GPS shows movement. Heading toward Lake Oswego." I froze, checking the timestamp. Ryan was supposed to be working downtown all night. Why was he returning early? Working swiftly, I completed the data transfer, carefully returned everything to its precise position, and exited the office. The biometric lock re-engaged with a soft click. I hurried to our master bathroom, turning on the shower and stripping off my clothes just as I heard the front door unlock. Stepping under the hot water, I forced my breathing to normalize, my mind racing to process what I'd discovered while preparing to play my role. "Jess?" Ryan called, his voice echoing through the house. "In the shower," I replied, injecting just the right amount of surprise in my tone. "I thought you were working late." The bathroom door opened, releasing steam as Ryan's silhouette appeared. "Meeting wrapped up earlier than expected," he explained, loosening his tie. "Thought I'd surprise you." I smiled through the glass shower door, wondering if he'd returned because something had triggered his suspicion. "Lucky me. How was your day?" Ryan leaned against the vanity, sharing carefully constructed details about his fictional executive meeting while I rinsed shampoo from my hair. Maintaining the performance of normalcy behind my attentive expression, I was cataloging the evidence I'd discovered, formulating next steps, identifying the legal vulnerabilities in his scheme. "You seem distracted," he observed as I stepped. out of the shower, wrapping myself in a plush towel. "Everything okay with Emma and the charity planning?" I manufactured a small sigh. "Just work stress. The Thompson Foundation audit is more complicated than expected." Something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, recalibration. "Whatever you need, babe. You know I'm here for you." Liar. Every move was calculated, every timeline precisely engineered for maximum extraction before discovery. That night, as Ryan slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, mentally revising my counterattack. I needed to move faster than anticipated, but couldn't risk alerting him. Tomorrow, I would implement the first phase of my response while continuing to play the unsuspecting wife. Ryan Miller had spent years perfecting his predatory operation, but he'd made one catastrophic miscalculation. He'd chosen a victim whose professional life had been built on detecting and dismantling financial fraud, whose personal connections extended throughout Portland's legal system, and whose determination now bordered on ruthless. As I finally drifted towards sleep, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. When this was over, Ryan wouldn't just lose his ill-gotten gains. He would lose everything. Morning arrived with Ryan already gone. A note on his pillow explaining, he had an early client breakfast. I knew exactly which client he was meeting. Victor Harlow, the developer planning to demolish my family home. I dressed carefully in one of my most imposing business suits, a charcoal pencil skirt and blazer with subtle pinstripes, and headed not to my office but to Portland Trust and Financial, one of the city's oldest banking institutions. "Jessica, this is unexpected," greeted Olivia Thompson, Senior Vice President of Private Banking, rising from behind her desk as I was shown into her corner office overlooking the Willamette River. "I apologize for the short notice," I replied, setting my briefcase on the polished conference table. "But this matter requires immediate attention and absolute discretion." Olivia gestured to the leather chairs. At 58, she remained one of the EI most respected banking executives in Oregon, her silver bob complementing her reputation for impeccable integrity. "I understand you've recently processed several property transfers through your lending officer, Thomas Brooks," I began, removing a folder from my briefcase. Olivia's expression didn't change, but her posture stiffened slightly. "Thomas handles numerous transactions. Which ones specifically interest you?" I slid the documentation across the table. "The fraudulent ones involving my properties, falsified using my forged signature." For 10 minutes, I methodically presented the evidence Jackson had compiled, explaining the elaborate scheme orchestrated by Ryan, facilitated by Thomas Brooks, and executed through Brooks's wife, Natalie. "If accurate, this represents a significant liability for our institution," Olivia noted, her tone measured as she examined the documents. "It's worse than that," I replied, producing another file. "Brooks has been involved in similar falsifications for at least 3 other major clients, all vulnerable to Ryan's specific targeting criteria: successful professional women with significant assets, minimal family connections, and high-value investment portfolios." Olivia's eyes narrowed. A woman who had built her reputation in the male-dominated banking world of the 1980s understood precisely what I was describing. "Brooks was hired on recommendation from Gregory Wilson," I continued, referencing one of the bank's senior loan officers. "I believe Wilson may be receiving kickbacks for providing banking cover to these operations." "That's a serious accusation against my officer, Jessica." "One I can substantiate," I countered, producing financial records showing irregular payments to offshore accounts connected to Wilson. "The question isn't whether this happened, Olivia. The question is how you'll respond now that you know." Olivia Thompson hadn't become one of the most powerful bankers in Portland by being easily intimidated. She studied me carefully before responding. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A coordinated response that protects your bank's reputation while ensuring justice is served," I explained. "I need access to all documentation processed by Brooks, Wilson's complete client list for the past 5 years, and your institution's cooperation with a discreet investigation led by Detective Mark Wilson. Olivia raised an eyebrow. Mark Wilson? From Financial Crimes? My former colleague, I confirmed, who is particularly interested in white-collar crime targeting professional women. For several minutes, Olivia considered her options. I waited patiently, knowing she was calculating potential damage to her institution against the benefits of alliance with law enforcement. What happens to Ryan Miller in this scenario? She finally asked. Justice, I replied simply. Complete. And proportionate. Olivia nodded once. Decision made. Brooks will be suspended pending investigation as of this afternoon. You'll have everything by close of business today. And Wilson will be handled appropriately once we've secured all evidence. I finished for her. As I prepared to leave, Olivia asked the question I'd been expecting. Why come to me directly? You could have gone straight to the authorities. I turned at the door. Because 20 years ago, when my mother was building her investment portfolio, you advised her honestly when others tried to take advantage of her widowed status. Because you understand what it means to build something meaningful only to have men attempt to take it from you. And because I need allies who recognize this isn't just about property theft, it's about predators who systematically target successful women. Olivia's expression softened fractionally. Your mother would be proud of your approach, Jessica. Methodical, thorough, and giving your opponent just enough rope. From Portland Trust and Financial, I went directly to my next strategic alliance, Laura Harlow, Victor's estranged wife and a prominent historic preservationist who had spent decades fighting against developers like her husband. We met in a private room at the Women's Club, where her grandmother and mine had both been founding members. Victor's involved in another historic demolition, Laura confirmed, her expression hardening. As I outlined what I'd discovered, that vindictive bastard knows exactly how much I care about preservation. He's meeting with Ryan this morning, I explained. They're accelerating the timeline. Laura pulled out her phone. My attorney handles the family foundation that still controls 25% of Victor's company. Consider demolition permits blocked indefinitely. By noon, I had secured commitments from Olivia Thompson, Laura Harlow, and 3 other strategically positioned allies, each with personal reasons to support my cause, each with resources crucial to my plan. My phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. GPS tracker shows Ryan heading to the bungalow again. Meeting with Harlow just ended abruptly. Something had changed. I needed to move faster. I parked 3 blocks from my grandmother's bungalow, using the service entrance of a neighboring property owned by an old family friend. Through their garden, I accessed the hidden pathway that connected to my backyard, a remnant from Prohibition days when these historic homes shared secret access routes. From dense shrubbery, I watched Ryan pacing my back terrace, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing emphatically. Even without hearing his words, his agitation was evident. Something had disrupted his carefully orchestrated plan. My phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Olivia. Brooks suspended. Electronic access revoked. Security escorting him out now. Wilson being monitored. That explained Ryan's distress. His banking facilitator had just lost access, likely, triggering internal security protocols at Portland Trust and Financial. The timeline had accelerated beyond his control. Ryan disappeared inside my house, and I used the opportunity to slip into the garden shed where I'd installed a secondary surveillance hub years ago. The monitors flickered to life, showing Ryan frantically searching through my grandmother's antique desk, rifling through drawers he had no right to touch. I activated the audio feed. "I don't care what it takes," Ryan was saying into his phone. "If Brooks doesn't have access, find someone else who does. We need those documents finalized before she..." The door chime interrupted him. On the monitor, I watched Victor Harlow enter without waiting for an invitation, his expression thunderous. "The permits are blocked," Harlow announced without preamble. "Every single one." Ryan froze. "That's impossible." "Your contact guaranteed." "My wife," Harlow cut in, "has apparently taken sudden interest in this property's historical significance. The Preservation Board received an emergency petition this morning with 200 signatures, including from the mayor's wife." Ryan's carefully controlled facade cracked momentarily, revealing the calculating predator beneath. "This is a temporary setback. We can refile under. My investors are already nervous about the accelerated timeline." Harlow interrupted again. "Now with permit delays and Laura involved, they're threatening to pull out entirely." "They can't back out now. The transfer is already—" "Is it?" Harlow challenged. "Because my sources at the county records office say there's an authentication. Hold on all recently filed deeds connected to a loan officer named Brooks." I watched Ryan's face pale slightly before he forced a confident smile. "Minor clerical issue. It'll be resolved by tomorrow." "It better be," Harlow warned. "I've already committed significant capital based on your guarantees." After Harlow left, Ryan made 3 more increasingly desperate calls, to his contact at the county records office, to Natalie Brooks, and finally to someone he referred to only as the cleaner. This last conversation used coded language about removing complications and ensuring complete transfer that sent a chill through me. I needed to accelerate my own plans. Ryan was growing desperate, and desperate predators were unpredictable. I slipped out the way I'd come, driving directly to the secure office where Detective Mark Wilson was coordinating our legal response. "Ryan's panicking," I reported, showing Mark and Emma the surveillance footage. "He mentioned a cleaner who handles complications." Mark's expression darkened. "This matches patterns from his previous operations. When Melanie Ward fought back, her condo suffered a suspicious flood that destroyed her documentation. When Stephanie Collins refused to vacate her Denver property, she experienced a break-in where only her legal papers were taken. We need to secure everything," I decided. "Not just documentation, but all my assets, client files, everything, connected to the Thompson Foundation and Riverfront Development." For the next hour, we executed an emergency protocol. Digital files transferred to secure servers, physical documents moved to Judge Robert Garcia's chambers, emergency filings prepared to freeze all transactions connected to my properties. "What? About personal safety?" Jackson asked quietly after Mark stepped out to make calls. I considered his question seriously. "Install additional security at our Lake Oswego house, and I need a secure way to gather final evidence without alerting Ryan." Jackson handed me a small case. "Upgraded surveillance. These look like regular jewelry but capture everything: audio, video, geolocation. Inside were diamond earrings, a watch, and a pendant, all containing sophisticated recording technology." "The watch is particularly important," Jackson explained. "It has a panic button feature. Press 3 times if you're in danger." I checked my phone as another message arrived, this one from Laura Harlow. "Victor is furious, threatening to contact alternate buyers. Mentioned investment group from overseas." Ryan was scrambling to salvage his operation, reaching out to backup resources. I needed to discover who these connections were before they emerged as unexpected threats. "We need complete surveillance on Harlow," I told Jackson. "If Ryan approaches new buyers, we need to know who they are." As I prepared to leave, Marky returned, his expression grave. "The forensic accountant found something disturbing," he said, placing a folder on the table. "The money trail from Ryan's previous victims doesn't end with offshore accounts. It continues to a network of shell companies connected to organized crime operations." I absorbed this information, recalibrating my understanding of exactly who I was dealing with. This wasn't just about my house, or even Ryan's pattern of targeting successful women. This was potentially part of a sophisticated criminal enterprise. "Does this change our approach?" I asked Mark. "It means we proceed even more carefully," he replied. "But it also means when we move against him, we'll have federal resources available." I nodded, standing to leave. Then we continue as planned. Tonight, I need to maintain the illusion that nothing has changed. Tonight, I would return home to Ryan, pretend I knew nothing of his scheme, and extract whatever information I could about his contacts, his backup plans, and most importantly, this mysterious cleaner. Justice was coming, complete, thorough, and inescapable. Ryan Miller was about to discover he'd made the worst mistake of his life when he targeted me. I returned to our Lake Oswego home at precisely 7:15, the time I typically arrived home on Tuesdays. Everything about my entrance needed to appear routine, from the sound of my keys in the door to the slight sigh as I set down my briefcase. Ryan was waiting with an opened bottle of my favorite Pinot Noir, his smile practiced yet strained around the edges. The dining table was elegantly set with the Italian ceramics we'd purchased in Tuscany, the trip where he'd first mentioned having children. "Special occasion?" I asked, accepting the glass he offered. "Just appreciating my beautiful wife," he replied, kissing my cheek. "You've been working so hard lately." The pendant camera captured his expression as he pulled away, calculating, assessing, searching for any sign that I suspected him. I returned his smile with practiced ease, years of high-stakes financial investigations making me adept at controlling my micro-expressions. "This is lovely," I said, gesturing to the table, "but unexpected. I thought you were working late again." "Change of plans," Ryan explained, returning to the kitchen where something simmered on the stove. "Market volatility created some unexpected opportunities. I closed a major position this afternoon." Translation: his scheme was imploding and he needed to accelerate his contingency plans. "Congratulations," I replied, slipping off my jacket. "Though I admit I'm exhausted. The Thompson Foundation situation became complicated today." Ryan's stirring paused fractionally. "Complications? Nothing serious, I hope." I shrugged, crafting my answer carefully. "Some questions about fund transfers and authorization protocols. Nothing I can't handle, but the audit might be delayed." The Thompson Foundation represented potential access to over $8 million in liquid assets, a significant component of what Ryan hoped to control through our marriage. A delay threatened his timeline. "How long a delay?" he asked, his tone casual, while his eyes remained sharp. "Hard to say. Could be a week, could be a month." I watched him recalibrate in real time, adjusting his approach based on this new information. His smile remained fixed, while his mind clearly raced through contingencies. "Whatever works best," he said finally. "I just want you to be happy." Throughout dinner, I maintained the delicate balance between normalcy and strategic information gathering. Each question I asked was carefully constructed to seem innocent, while designed to extract specific details. "How's Natalie's real estate?" "Business," I inquired midway through the meal. "Didn't you mention she was handling that property in Laurelhurst?" Ryan's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "I think she mentioned something about that. Market's competitive there." My grandmother's bungalow is in that neighborhood," I murmured. "I should have her assess its value sometime, purely out of curiosity." His expression flickered. Concern, calculation, then forced casualness. "Real estate isn't always the best investment. Markets fluctuate." "True," I conceded, "but some properties have sentimental value that transcends market considerations. I could never part with that house. Too many memories." Ryan reached for the wine bottle, refilling my glass perhaps too generously. "Sometimes, nostalgia costs us opportunities." Just then, his phone chimed with what appeared to be an urgent message. He glanced at it, his expression darkening momentarily before he excused himself to make a call. In his brief absence, I placed a tiny surveillance device beneath the credenza in his office, the final component needed to complete our monitoring grid. When he returned, his manner had subtly shifted from romantic to businesslike. "I hate to do this," he began, "but there's an emerging situation with Asian markets I need to handle tonight." I feigned disappointment while inwardly celebrating this unexpected opportunity. "Don't worry about me. I have audit documents to review anyway." As soon as Ryan left, I activated all recording devices and messaged Jackson. "Target has left premises. Operation Safeguard is active." Within 20 minutes, a discreet team arrived to create comprehensive documentation of everything in our shared home: photographing documents, cloning devices, cataloging evidence. Meanwhile, I compiled a detailed inventory of my personal possessions, particularly family heirlooms and irreplaceable items. "Ryan's heading to the Arlington Club," Jackson reported via secure line, "meeting someone named Kazarian." The name triggered immediate recognition: Armin Kazarian, rumored connection to international money laundering operations. If Ryan was meeting him directly, the situation had escalated beyond property fraud. As Jackson's team completed their work, I made one final call to Mark. "We've identified the cleaner," he informed me. "Former military contractor specializing in document destruction and digital forensics. Currently on a flight to Portland, arriving tomorrow morning." Time was running out faster than anticipated. Ryan wasn't just trying to steal my property. He was preparing to eliminate all evidence that might implicate him. "Implement protocol checkmate," I instructed Jackson as the team departed. "We move tomorrow." Dawn broke with a text from Ryan. "Early meeting with international clients. See you tonight for dinner." Perfect timing. I dressed quickly in a navy suit and pearl earrings containing Mark's most sophisticated recording technology, then headed not to my office but to the private banking division of Northwest Federal. "Ms. Miller," greeted Harrison Wells, the bank's executive vice president of security. "Detective Wilson mentioned you might be visiting us." Wells ushered me into a private conference room where an array of documents awaited my signature. For the next hour, I executed a series of financial maneuvers designed to protect my assets while creating a convincing illusion for Ryan. "These accounts will appear active but actually function as honeypots," Wells explained, indicating a set of newly created decoys. "Any access attempts will be logged and traced without alerting the intruder." "And the Thompson Foundation and Riverfront Development Funds?" "Already secured under the judicial protection order Judge Garcia issued last night." The financial architecture Wells and I constructed was quite elegant. From the outside, everything appeared normal, but any attempt to transfer or access funds would trigger immediate security protocols. I signed the final authorization, then asked the crucial question: "What about Ryan's accounts?" Wells slid a folder across the polished table. "As you suspected, he's been moving substantial sums offshore throughout the past week. However, his most recent transfers have encountered unexpected complications." I reviewed the documentation showing how Ryan's attempts to move millions had been subtly redirected into monitored holding accounts, a sophisticated financial trap Mark had helped orchestrate through his federal connections. "He doesn't realize it yet," Wells continued, "but he's effectively locked himself out of approximately $2.7 million so. And Kazarian's involvement?" Wells's expression tightened. "That's where this extends beyond civil fraud. Treasury Department is now monitoring all transactions between Miller and Kazarian-connected entities. They've identified patterns consistent with international money laundering. This confirmed my suspicions about Ryan's operation extending beyond simple property theft. He wasn't just stealing from women like me, he was potentially part of a sophisticated criminal network." From the bank, I proceeded to the county recorder's office, where Samantha Chen, the deputy registrar and Emma's cousin, waited with another set of critical documents. "The authentication hold worked perfectly," Samantha explained, spreading property records across her desk. "Ryan's attempt to transfer your bungalow created a digital tripwire. Every property transaction he's touched in the past 3 years is now flagged for review. What about the current deed status? Samantha smiled tightly. Officially, the property remains registered to you. The falsified transfer triggered automatic verification protocols Emma implemented last year after that real estate fraud case in Selwood. Ryan's paperwork is essentially suspended in bureaucratic limbo. And Harlow's development plans? Officially on hold pending historical review by the Preservation Board, Samantha confirmed, which coincidentally is chaired by Laura Harlow this quarter. I signed the necessary affidavits confirming the forgery allegations, which would initiate a formal investigation into all parties involved in the fraudulent transfer. By mid-morning, I had secured my financial assets, protected my properties, and initiated formal investigations into Ryan's activities, all without him realizing his carefully constructed scheme was unraveling. My next destination was the offices of Sentinel Security, where Jackson had established our operational headquarters. The moment I entered, I knew something had changed. The energy in the room was different, more urgent, more focused. "We've identified the cleaner," Jackson announced. Without preamble, Jacob Stern, former military intelligence, dishonorable discharge after allegations of evidence tampering in Afghanistan, currently works as a digital crisis consultant for wealthy clients with problematic situations. Jackson displayed Stern's surveillance photos on the main screen, a nondescript man in his 40s with military short hair and calculating eyes. "He landed at PDX 90 minutes ago," Jackson continued. "Currently checked into the Nines Hotel under the name James Smith. He's scheduled to meet Ryan at your bungalow at 2 p.m. This accelerated our timeline considerably. Whatever Ryan planned to clean, it would happen today." "Do we have audio surveillance prepared at the house?" I asked. "Better than that," Jackson replied, pulling up a schematic of my bungalow. "We've implemented complete coverage, audio, video, thermal imaging. If they so much as whisper, we capture it." Andrea Novak, the assistant district attorney Mark had brought into our confidence, stepped forward with a document bearing an official seal. "Judge Garcia secured federal authorization for the surveillance," she explained. "Everything we collect will be admissible, provided we maintain proper chain of custody." I reviewed the operational details, noting how Jackson had coordinated with law enforcement to ensure our evidence gathering remained legally unassailable while maximizing our strategic advantage. "What about Kazarian?" I asked, turning to the international aspect of Ryan's scheme. Jackson pulled up another file, this one marked with federal designations. "Treasury Department has authorized us to share limited information. Kazarian appears to be using Ryan and others like him to convert illegally obtained funds into seemingly legitimate real estate assets, making Ryan not just a con man, but potentially an accessory to international money laundering," Andrea added, "which significantly increases potential charges and sentencing guidelines." I checked my watch, 11:30 a.m. Ryan would meet his cleaner in less than 3 hours, providing us the final evidence needed to complete our case against him. "Set up the command center at my bungalow," I instructed. "I want to be on site when they arrive." By 1:30 p.m., we had transformed the carriage house behind my bungalow into a sophisticated surveillance command center. Multiple monitors displayed feeds from cameras strategically placed throughout the main house, while a small team of technical specialists monitored recording equipment and maintained secure connections to Judge Garcia's chambers and Andrea's office. "Audio calibration complete," reported Tessa, Jackson's top surveillance expert. "We've got crystal clear pickup in every room, even with whispered conversations." I studied the property's thermal imaging display, which showed no heat signatures. Inside the main house. "Entry point secured?" "All doors and windows are under monitoring," Jackson confirmed. "They'll register any access attempt, but we've ensured nothing appears obviously secured. The house looks exactly as Ryan expects it to." At 1:45, the first alert sounded, a vehicle approaching the property. The black Escalade circled once before parking half a block away. Through high-powered lenses, we watched Jacob Stern, the cleaner, conduct a methodical perimeter check of my property, scanning for surveillance equipment with a handheld device that fortunately wasn't sophisticated enough to detect our military-grade systems. "He's good," Jackson observed. Ex-intelligence training is evident in his approach pattern. At 1:55, a second vehicle appeared, Ryan's Audi, parking directly in front of the house with the confident entitlement of someone who believed he owned the property. Through our directional microphones, we captured his phone conversation as he exited the car. "I'm here now," Ryan said to someone. "Yes, everything's prepared. No, she doesn't suspect anything. The Thompson Foundation access is still on schedule. I understand the timeline acceleration." "Yes, sir." Stern approached from his surveillance position, and the two men exchanged terse greetings before Ryan used a key he had no legitimate right to possess, to enter my home. "Recording all of this?" I confirmed with Andrea, who represented our law enforcement component. "Every moment," she affirmed. "Unlawful entry established, conspiracy in progress." Inside my house, Ryan led Stern to my grandmother's study, the heart of the home where family documents had been kept for generations. "Primary target is here," Ryan explained, gesturing to the antique secretary desk. "We need all property documentation removed and digital backups located. She maintains redundant systems." Stern surveyed the room with professional detachment. "Alarm systems? Hidden security?" "Disabled," Ryan replied with unearned confidence. "I've had access to the property for months. Security codes haven't changed since we started dating." What Ryan didn't know was that I'd maintained a completely separate security system he'd never discovered, one now feeding directly to our surveillance operation. "What about digital evidence?" Stern asked, unfolding specialized equipment from a compact case. Ryan moved to my grandmother's painting, a Monet-inspired garden scene that concealed a wall safe. "Primary target is behind here. Safe combination is 26 to 14 to 38. I watched, stomach tightening, as Ryan casually opened my family safe, something I'd never shown him, never discussed. The violation felt intensely personal, beyond the legal implications. "How did he get the combination?" Andrea whispered. "He must have watched me open it," I realized. "There's a reflection in the grandfather clock glass if you stand at the right angle." Inside the safe, Ryan removed the original deed to the bungalow, property surveys, and historical documentation establishing the home's provenance and value. "These are the originals," Ryan explained to Stern. "They need to disappear completely, and there should be digital backup drives as well." Stern methodically photographed each document before placing them in an evidence bag. "What about insurance? Documentation?" "Secondary target," Ryan replied, moving to my grandmother's desk, along with historical appraisals and conservation easement paperwork. For the next 45 minutes, we documented as the two men systematically located and removed every piece of documentation connecting me to my family home. Original deeds, insurance policies, tax records, historical designations, and family photographs showing generations of Millers in the bungalow. "This is beyond property theft," Andrea murmured. "This is identity erasure." She was right. Ryan wasn't just stealing my house. He was attempting to eradicate my very connection to it, eliminating the evidence that bound my family history to the property. "What about her law office?" Stern asked as they finished with the home documentation. "That's phase 2, Ryan replied, checking his watch. "We have a narrow window tomorrow. Tomorrow morning while she's in court, Brooks is handling access." "Brooks has been compromised," Stern stated flatly. "My sources confirm he was escorted from Portland Trust and Financial yesterday." Ryan's expression darkened. "That's impossible. He would have warned me." "His credentials were revoked, digital access terminated, Building privileges suspended, Stern continued dispassionately. We need alternate access to her professional documentation. Through the high-resolution camera, I could see the calculation in Ryan's eyes as he processed this setback. I can access her home computer tonight, he decided. She keeps client backup files there. Inefficient, Stern objected. Too many variables with her present. I'll handle it, Ryan insisted. I've been managing her for 7 years. One more night is nothing. The casual confidence with which he discussed managing me sent ice through my veins. 7 years of my life with a man who viewed our entire relationship as nothing more than an extended con operation. They're moving to the basement, Tessa reported as the thermal signatures shifted downward in my home. In my cellar, Ryan showed Stern the wine storage concealing a secondary storage area where family archives were kept, historical photographs, journals, and memorabilia documenting the Miller family's connection to the house since 1918. All of this needs to go, Ryan instructed. Complete removal. When we're done, there should be no evidence the Miller family ever owned this property. Scorched? Earth approach, Stern noted. Expensive. Ryan's reply chilled me. Kazarian doesn't care about expense. He cares about clean assets with no complications. For nearly 2 hours, we documented as Ryan and Stern methodically violated my home, collecting and cataloging every document that established my ownership. Their thoroughness was both impressive and disturbing. They located hidden storage areas, identified concealed safes, and systematically removed generations of Miller family history. We're approaching decision point, Jackson noted, checking his watch. Do we intervene now or allow them to leave with the documentation? Andrea and I exchanged glances, silently, calculating risk factors. If we stop them now, we catch them red-handed with my documents, I reasoned. But if we let them leave, we potentially trace them to other conspirators. Tracking devices are active on both vehicles, Tessa confirmed. We've also placed trackers within the document cases themselves. Let them complete their operation, I decided. We need to identify everyone involved, not just catch Ryan and his cleaner. We watched as the men finished their systematic purge of my home. Final sweep complete, Stern announced, closing his specialized equipment case. Property documentation has been secured, digital evidence located and removed. Ryan surveyed the study, satisfaction evident in his expression. Good. Phase 1. Complete. Tomorrow we handle her office files, then accelerate the Kazarian timeline. Andrea's eyebrows rose at this explicit mention, her hand already reaching for her secure phone to update federal authorities monitoring the Kazarian connection. What's our extraction plan? Stern asked. All business. You take the documentation to the processing location, Ryan instructed. I'll return to normal activities to maintain cover. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp, we meet at her office. Security access has been arranged through alternate channels. As they prepared to leave, Ryan paused at my grandmother's portrait above, the fireplace, casually removing it from the wall. Clients appreciate authentic period pieces, he remarked, wrapping the painting in a protective covering. This adds another $100,000 to the property package. The casual theft of my grandmother's portrait, painted by a renowned Oregon artist when she'd received her first judicial appointment, crystallized everything about Ryan's character. Not content with stealing my home and erasing my family's connection to it, he was now plundering personal treasures for additional profit. Once both men had left the property, our team shifted into high-precision tracking mode. Tessa monitored the GPS signals from both vehicles, while Jackson coordinated with federal agents who had been strategically positioned around Portland. Stern is heading east on Burnside, Tessa reported. Ryan is returning to Lake Oswego, likely to your house. I checked my watch, nearly 5 p.m. I needed to maintain my cover for a few more hours, pretending I suspected nothing while our evidence collection operation reached its conclusion. Andrea, You coordinate with the federal task force on Stern's destination, I instructed. Jackson maintains surveillance on Ryan. I need to return home and play my role one last time. Before departing, I walked through my violated home, cataloging what had been taken, what remained, what had been disturbed. In the study, empty spaces on walls marked where family photographs had hung for generations. The antique secretary desk stood open, drawers emptied of their contents. We'll recover everything, Andrea promised, seeing my expression. It's not just about recovery, I replied quietly. It's about justice, complete justice. On my secure drive back to Lake Oswego, Mark called with an update. Federal agents are monitoring Stern's movement to a warehouse in Tualatin, he reported. Treasury Department has authorized a surveillance operation based on the Kazarian connection. They'll maintain distance until we've gathered maximum evidence. And Ryan's financial movements? Completely mapped, Mark confirmed. The honeypot accounts show multiple access attempts in the past hour. He's trying to consolidate funds, likely preparing for rapid departure once the property transaction completes. I arrived at our house at my usual time, mentally preparing for perhaps the most challenging performance of my life. Inside, Ryan had prepared an intimate dinner setting, candles, wine, music, all designed to manipulate and distract. "There's my beautiful wife," he greeted, kissing my cheek as if he hadn't spent the afternoon systematically erasing my family history. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night. What about a tropical getaway next week? I've made some calls. We could fly to Bali on Monday." His urgency was now transparent. He needed me out of the country while his cleaner completed the evidence removal and the property transfer finalized. "That sounds lovely," I replied, maintaining my role while the recording devices in my jewelry captured every word. Though, I'd need to address some client matters first. "Business will always be there," Ryan interrupted smoothly. "Some things are more important. Us, for instance." He poured wine with practiced charm, his expression betraying nothing of his afternoon activities. Meanwhile, my phone silently vibrated with updates from our surveillance team. Stern arrived at Tualatin Warehouse. Federal agents confirming location as document processing facility linked to 3 previous identity theft operations. Ryan's laptop, accessed remotely, downloading encrypted communications with Kazarian organization. Judge Garcia has secured federal warrants for all identified conspirators. Enforcement coordinated for tomorrow morning. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Our evidence collection was nearly complete, warrants were being finalized, and enforcement teams were preparing for coordinated action. All I needed to do was maintain my cover for a few more hours, extracting final pieces of information while keeping Ryan's suspicions dormant. Over dinner, I carefully led the conversation toward his business trip scheduled for the coming weekend. A trip I now knew was meant to finalize arrangements with Kazarian after my documentation was processed. "Tell me more about this Singapore conference," I prompted innocently. "Perhaps I could join you after our Bali visit?" Ryan's momentary hesitation was nearly imperceptible before he smoothly fabricated details about a non-existent investment symposium, each lie another strand. In the evidence web we were weaving around him, after dinner, Ryan suggested a nightcap on our terrace. His manner was relaxed yet watchful as we settled into the cushioned chairs overlooking the illuminated garden. "I was thinking about the Thompson Foundation today," I mentioned casually, sipping the aged bourbon he'd poured. "Their historical documentation is fascinating. Property records dating back to the 1920s Oregon timber boom." Ryan's interest sharpened, though he tried to appear merely curious. "Historical documents? Anything valuable?" "Primarily sentimental value," I replied with calculated nonchalance, "though I suppose some collectors might find them interesting. They're secured in my office safe." His expression remained neutral, but I noted the slight adjustment in his calm posture, mentally adding this information to tomorrow's operation with Stern. "I've been meaning to show you something," I continued, withdrawing an antique key from my pocket. My grandmother's key to our family's mountain cabin in Bend. I've been thinking we should visit there after our trip. Ryan's eyes fixed on the E, a key to a property he clearly hadn't known existed. I didn't realize your family had a place in Bend. It's not something I talk about much, I explained. The property has been in a family trust for generations. Very private, very exclusive. I watched him recalculate, mentally adjusting his assessment of my assets. The mountain cabin was real, but its value was modest compared to the bungalow. Still, Ryan's reaction confirmed his fundamental motivation. He viewed me primarily as a collection of assets to be acquired. We should definitely visit, he agreed, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Perhaps even before Bali. Throughout the evening, I carefully planted mentions of fictional documents, non-existent safety deposit boxes, and fabricated family heirlooms, creating a trail of misinformation that would keep Ryan and his associates chasing shadows even after our trap closed around them. My phone vibrated silently with updates from our surveillance operation. Stern still at Tualatin facility. Multiple individuals identified entering, exiting. Facial recognition confirming connections to previous fraud cases. Remote access to Ryan's encrypted communications successful. Evidence of coordination with at least 3 other similar operations targeting professional women with significant property holdings. Ryan excused himself to make a quick business call, stepping inside while I remained on the terrace. Through our surveillance system, Jackson confirmed he was contacting Kazarian, updating him on the document acquisition and adjusting tomorrow's timeline. When Ryan returned, he carried a small velvet box. I've been saving this for the right moment, he explained, presenting me with a diamond bracelet that perfectly matched my engagement ring. Consider it an early anniversary gift. I allowed him to fasten it around my wrist, suppressing my revulsion at his touch. The bracelet was exquisite and almost certainly purchased with proceeds from previous victims. I would later learn it had belonged to Stephanie Collins, the Denver executive whose life Ryan had destroyed before targeting me. It's beautiful, I murmured, knowing the recording devices in my earrings captured the moment he placed stolen property on my wrist. Another charge to add to his growing list of offenses. As midnight approached, Ryan grew increasingly affectionate, suggesting we turn in early with unmistakable implications. The thought of maintaining my charade through physical intimacy made my skin crawl. But I was saved by another urgent message on his phone. I need to handle this. He apologized, frowning at his screen. Market fluctuations in Asian trading. Give me 30 minutes. Take your time, I replied, suppressing my relief. I have some briefs to review anyway. When he retreated to his office, I messaged Jackson. Status update. His response was immediate. All evidence secured. Federal agents maintaining surveillance on Tualatin facility. 8 individuals now identified in conspiracy. Judge Garcia finalizing warrants for coordinated morning raids. Everything was proceeding according to plan. By tomorrow afternoon, Ryan's entire operation would be dismantled, his co-conspirators arrested, his assets frozen, and his freedom forfeit. In our bedroom, I prepared for sleep with mechanical precision, my mind cataloging final preparations. Though I maintained outward calm, inwardly I acknowledged the complex emotions swirling beneath my strategic focus. Grief for the relationship I'd believed was real, rage at the calculated betrayal, and cold determination to ensure justice was served completely. Ryan finally joined me after midnight, sliding into bed with practiced ease, his arm draping possessively across my waist. I regulated my breathing to feign sleep while remaining acutely aware of his proximity. I love you, he whispered in the darkness. One final performance for the woman he believed remained fooled by his elaborate charade. Through narrowly opened eyes, I watched him check his phone one last time before setting it aside. The screen briefly illuminated his face, revealing an expression I'd never seen before: cold, calculating, utterly devoid of the warmth he typically affected in my presence. This was Ryan's true face, the predator beneath the charming facade. In the stillness of our bedroom, surrounded by luxury items purchased with the proceeds of his previous victims, I mentally rehearsed tomorrow's sequence of events. Federal agents would arrest Stern and his associates at the Tualatin facility at precisely 8 a.m. Simultaneously, Treasury Department officials would freeze all accounts connected to Kazarian's operation. Meanwhile, Ryan would be arrested while attempting to access my office files, caught in the act of perpetrating fraud against not just me, but my clients. By mid-morning, his entire operation would collapse like a house of cards, each carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of irrefutable evidence. His criminal associates would race to save themselves by providing testimony against him. His stolen assets would be identified, cataloged, and restored to their rightful owners. And I would be there to witness it all, the architect of his complete and inescapable downfall. As Ryan's breathing deepened in sleep beside me, I allowed myself a moment of grim satisfaction. Tomorrow would be the final act in our 7-year performance, though only one of us knew the true ending that awaited. I woke before dawn, carefully extracting myself from Ryan's sleeping form. In the bathroom, I prepared for the day with meticulous attention, selecting a charcoal pencil skirt and blazer that projected authority and composure. Today's outfit wasn't just professional attire, it was armor. Ryan stirred as I finished applying my makeup, watching me through half-lidded eyes. "Early court appearance?" "The Thompson matter," I confirmed, securing my diamond earrings with their hidden recording technology. Judge Garcia requested an 8 a.m. chambers conference. His expression flickered momentarily, Robert's involvement clearly unsettling him, before he manufactured a supportive smile. "Need me to drive you? I could rearrange my morning calls." "No need," I replied, fastening my watch. "Emma's picking me up. We're having breakfast first." This fabrication served two purposes: preventing Ryan from accompanying me and establishing that someone expected my presence elsewhere, a standard safety protocol when dealing with potentially dangerous individuals. Ryan rose, moving to embrace me from behind, his reflection in the mirror the picture of a devoted husband. "Good luck today. I'm thinking Bali reservations for next Monday. I could make some calls this morning." I turned in his arms, studying his face one final time, the face that had convinced me of his sincerity for 7 years. "That sounds perfect." As we parted in our foyer, Ryan kissed me with practiced tenderness. "Love you. See you tonight for celebration dinner." I smiled with equal inauthenticity. Looking forward to it. The moment I entered the elevator, I activated secure communication protocols on my phone, messaging Jackson. "Departing residence. Now. Target remains inside. Operation status?" His response came immediately. "All teams in position. Federal agents surrounding Tualatin facility. Office security in place. Surveillance active on all subjects." In the parking garage, I bypassed my usual vehicle for the nondescript sedan Jackson had arranged. Within minutes, I was en route to the command center established in a federal building downtown, where Mark, Andrea, and key law enforcement officials awaited my arrival. "Final briefing in progress," Mark greeted me, gesturing toward the central tactical display, where multiple surveillance feeds showed our various targets. Ryan sent a coded confirmation to Stern minutes ago. They're proceeding as planned. The operations room hummed with controlled activity as federal agents, cybersecurity specialists, and financial crimes investigators coordinated their respective responsibilities. On the main screen, Ryan appeared in our Lake Oswego home, dressing hurriedly after receiving an encrypted message from Stern. They believed they had a 90-minute window while I was in court. "Facial recognition has identified 3 additional associates arriving at the Tualatin facility," Jackson explained, joining us at the command table. Treasury Department confirms 2 have direct ties to Khazarian organization. I studied the tactical display showing real-time positions of all surveillance teams and law enforcement units. Timeline confirmation? Ryan will leave for your office in approximately 20 minutes, Jackson replied. Stern is dispatching 2 associates to meet him there. Meanwhile, primary document processing continues at the Tualatin warehouse. Andrea approached with an update from the Treasury Department. Khazarian himself has arrived in Portland, landed at a private airfield 30 minutes ago, currently en route to the Heathman Hotel for what they believe is the final transaction. Approval. This development exceeded our expectations. Having Khazarian personally present would elevate the case from fraud and money laundering to potential RICO charges, transforming a serious case into a major federal prosecution. Adjust the operation parameters, I instructed. We need surveillance coverage at the Heathman immediately. Mark nodded to a federal agent who immediately began coordinating additional resources. Treasury Department is dispatching a specialized team. This significantly expands our operation scope. For the next 15 minutes, I reviewed final preparations, with each team leader ensuring every aspect of our complex counter-move was synchronized. On surveillance monitors, we watched Ryan leave our building, enter his Audi, and begin driving toward my office building. All units confirm ready status, announced the FBI tactical commander. Authorization to proceed awaits your signal, Detective Wilson. Mark looked to me, a silent acknowledgement that while this was officially a federal operation, the decision to proceed remained mine. This was personal justice as much as legal remedy. I took a deep breath, thinking of Melanie Ward and Stephanie Collins, the previous victims who had lost everything to Ryan's predatory scheme. Thinking of my grandmother's portrait, casually stolen as a profitable afterthought. Thinking of 7 years spent with a man who had viewed our entire relationship as nothing more than an elaborate con. Proceed, I authorized, my voice steady. Throughout the operations center, a coordinated cascade of activity commenced. On multiple screens, we watched as federal agents simultaneously converged on the Tualatin warehouse, Ryan's position near my office, and the Heathman Hotel, where Khazarian had just checked in. Target 1 entering your office building, reported the surveillance coordinator. Accompanied by 2 unidentified males matching Stern associate profiles. Team in position, came another update. Warehouse perimeter secured. Heathman. Team reports visual confirmation of Khazarian in presidential suite. 2 known associates present. The operation unfolded with military precision. At precisely 8:17 a.m., federal agents executed coordinated raids at all 3 locations simultaneously. Through live feeds, we watched as Ryan was apprehended in the Yaya Tour act of attempting to access my office with falsified credentials. His expression of shock when confronted by armed federal agents was captured in high definition. The moment he realized his carefully constructed world was imploding. All primary targets in custody, confirmed the tactical commander 7 minutes later. No casualties, no collateral damage, evidence recovery proceeding at all locations. Andrea turned to me, professional satisfaction evident in her expression. Preliminary inventory from the Tualatin facility confirms recovery of all documentation removed from your bungalow yesterday. Additionally, they've located files appearing to belong to at least 7 other victims. I nodded, emotions carefully controlled as I watched the simultaneous operations conclude successfully on the tactical displays. Ryan's 7-year scheme had been dismantled in less than 20 minutes of coordinated law enforcement action. What happens now? I asked Mark, watching as Ryan was escorted to a federal vehicle, his hands cuffed behind his back. Now, he replied with grim satisfaction, we build the most comprehensive fraud, identity theft, and money laundering case this jurisdiction has ever seen. The federal building's interview observation room offered perfect sightlines to Ryan's interrogation through one-way glass. For nearly 3 hours, I watched as he transitioned through textbook stages of denial, anger, bargaining, and finally calculating cooperation. He's attempting to minimize, noted Special Agent Rivera, the lead investigator assigned to Ryan's case, claiming he was merely an unwitting participant in Kazarian's operation. I studied Ryan's body language as he spoke with federal prosecutors. The subtle tells I'd learned to recognize during our relationship now glaringly obvious. The slight adjustment of his cuffs when fabricating details. The momentary eye shift when constructing timelines. The practiced sincerity I'd once mistaken for genuine emotion. He's building a narrative where he's another victim, I observed. Classic manipulation strategy. Rivera nodded appreciatively at my assessment. Unfortunately for Mr. Miller, we've already interviewed Stern. Their stories have critical contradictions. At noon, Mark joined us with updates from the parallel. Operations. Kazarian is maintaining silence, but his associates are competing to offer testimony. Treasury has frozen over $40 million in connected assets across 12 jurisdictions. And the Tualatin facility? I asked. Evidence processing continues, but preliminary findings exceed expectations. They've identified documentation from 9 separate fraud operations targeting professional women across 4 states. The pattern is consistent. Professional women with significant property holdings, minimal family connections, high-value client portfolios. My phone vibrated with a message from Jackson. Bungalow documentation fully recovered. Grandmother's portrait located in Stern's vehicle. All items being processed as evidence but can be returned within 72 hours. Relief washed through me, tempered by the knowledge that while my property would be restored, the violation of my home and trust couldn't be so easily remedied. We've connected Brooks to 3 other paralegals at different firms, Rivera continued, updating the evidence. Board. They've been facilitating similar documentation fraud for at least 5 years. Andrea entered with a thick binder of financial records. Treasury Department completed preliminary analysis of the money trails. Ryan personally received approximately $5.1 million from previous operations. Most was laundered through shell companies before being reinvested in legitimate businesses, including the insurance firm where he claimed to work. I noted the final piece clicking into place. His entire professional identity was constructed using proceeds from previous victims. In the interrogation room, Ryan's demeanor had shifted to pragmatic cooperation as federal prosecutors outlined the evidence against him. The man who had charmed me for 7 years was methodically bartering information in exchange for consideration, offering details about Kazarian's organization, identifying co-conspirators, detailing operational methods. Classic narcissistic response, observed Dr. Harris, the FBI psychological consultant. No genuine remorse, just strategic adaptation to maximize personal advantage. By mid-afternoon, the evidence recovery teams had photographed, cataloged, and secured all documentation taken from my bungalow. Additionally, they had identified financial records connecting Ryan to his previous victims, Melanie Ward and Stephanie Collins, along with evidence suggesting at least 5 other women had been targeted but escaped before operations completed. We've located Stephanie Collins, Andrea reported, referring to Ryan's Denver victim. Treasury Department is preparing to unfreeze assets they've identified as rightfully hers. She's being contacted about providing testimony. The implications extended beyond just criminal charges. With federal authorities involved and connection to international money laundering established, civil asset recovery became significantly more feasible. Women who had previously lost everything might actually recover substantial portions of their stolen property. At 3 URs, I met briefly with Ryan's defense attorney, a federal public defender assigned temporarily until private counsel could be arranged. The contrast between this harried public servant and the high-powered legal representation Ryan had always bragged about accessing was stark illustration of how completely his facade had collapsed. My client is interested in discussing cooperation parameters, the attorney began awkwardly. That would be between your client and federal prosecutors, I replied coolly. I'm here strictly as a victim providing evidence. He specifically requested to speak with you, the attorney continued. He believes there are personal matters that might facilitate resolution. Mark, who had accompanied me as both law enforcement officer and personal support, interjected firmly. Any communication with Ms. Miller will occur only through formal channels, with full recording and appropriate protections in place. Your client's history of manipulation and psychological coercion makes informal contact inappropriate. By late afternoon, federal prosecutors had outlined preliminary charges against Ryan: wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, conspiracy, and racketeering. The combined charges carried potential sentences exceeding 30 years. With Kazarian's organization now implicated, additional charges related to international financial crimes remained pending. They've offered him a cooperation deal, Rivera informed me. 20 years with possibility of reduction to 15 in exchange for complete testimony against Kazarian and all associates. His response? I asked. Initial rejection. He still believes he can negotiate better terms. Rivera's expression held professional detachment tinged with satisfaction. He doesn't yet understand the comprehensive nature of our evidence, typical of individuals accustomed to manipulating systems. As evening approached, I returned to my bungalow, accompanied by Jackson and a security team. The house had been processed as a crime scene, with evidence technicians having documented every aspect of Ryan and Stern's activities. Yellow evidence markers still dotted locations where they had removed or tampered with documentation. I moved through rooms that had been in my family for generations, cataloging violated spaces, disturbed belongings, compromised sanctuaries. In my grandmother's study, I paused before the empty space where her portrait had hung, a visceral reminder of how thoroughly Ryan had betrayed every aspect of trust. The portrait will be returned tomorrow, Jackson assured me. All your documentation is secure. The house remains legally yours. It never actually transferred. I nodded, appreciating his attempt at comfort while knowing that legal restoration couldn't address the deeper violation. Ryan hadn't just attempted to steal my property, he had systematically exploited my trust. 3 days after Ryan's arrest, the federal task force recovered my grandmother's portrait from a storage unit registered to Jacob Stern. The painting had been carefully prepared for international shipment, tagged with documentation identifying it as part of the Kazarian portfolio acquisition. Seeing it return to its rightful place above the fireplace brought a sense of order slowly being restored, though the violation remained a constant undercurrent. They were planning to move everything offshore within 48 hours, Mark explained as we stood in my study, now partially restored with returned family photographs and documents. If we'd waited even one more day, most of these items would have been on container ships bound for Eastern Europe. I ran my fingers along my grandmother's antique desk, now back in its proper position. And the documents from the safe? Authentication complete, Mark confirmed. Everything's been verified as original and genuine. No unauthorized copies were made beyond the ones we seized as evidence. Security systems had been completely overhauled throughout the property. Advanced motion sensors, biometric access, controls, and direct connection to law enforcement monitoring stations now protected my home. Similar upgrades had been implemented at my office, with client files secured under enhanced protocols designed by Jackson himself. The Treasury Department has some updates, Mark continued, checking his secure phone. They've identified additional properties connected to Kazarian's operation. 2 in Seattle, 1 in San Diego, all acquired through similar methods, all targeting professional women with substantial assets. I nodded, absorbing this information while considering its implications. Have the other victims been notified? Contact protocols initiated yesterday. Financial security advisors are working with each woman to secure remaining assets and begin recovery proceedings. Outside, the garden glowed in late afternoon sunlight, unchanged despite the chaos that had swirled around it. The Japanese maple my grandfather had planted still spread its delicate branches over the koi pond. The stone pathways my grandmother had designed still wound through carefully tended perennials. The structure of the place remained intact, even if my perception of it had been forever altered. "The district attorney wants to meet tomorrow to discuss prosecution strategy," Mark said, interrupting my thoughts. "Kazarian's attorneys are already floating plea arrangements. They want to minimize exposure by offering Ryan as the primary operator." "Convenient," I remarked, turning from the window. After using him for years to acquire properties, they're now positioning him as the mastermind. Standard organized crime tactics: insulate the leadership, sacrifice the soldiers. Mark's expression reflected his decades in law enforcement. But the evidence trail we've established makes that impossible. We can place Kazarian directly in the chain of command. My phone chimed with a message from Emma. Judge Garcia signed the emergency asset seizure order. Everything connected to RM now frozen pending forfeiture proceedings. Another small victory in what was becoming a methodical dismantling of Ryan's entire existence. His assets frozen, his freedom revoked, his carefully constructed false identity exposed for what it truly was, a predatory facade designed to enable systematic theft. I moved to my grandmother's bookshelf, now partially refilled with family albums and historical volumes that federal agents had recovered from the Tualatin warehouse. "What about Stephanie and Melanie?" I asked, referring to Ryan's previous victims. "Any progress on recovery for them?" Mark nodded. Treasury has identified approximately 60% of Stephanie's assets in various holdings. Recovery procedures initiated yesterday. Melanie's situation is more complicated. Many assets were liquidated and moved through multiple jurisdictions. However, seizures from Kazarian's accounts may provide restitution options. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of Andrea Novak, and the forensic accountant assigned to track the complex financial web Ryan had created. "The financial assessment is complete," Andrea announced once we'd settled in the living room, spreading documents across the coffee table. Ryan's own net worth, excluding Kazarian connections, totals approximately $11. $2 million. "All derived from his victims?" I asked. "Every penny," confirmed Michael Torres, the forensic accountant. "His legitimate income from Pacific Northwest. Insurance was deposited directly into operational accounts for his fraud activities. His actual lifestyle was funded entirely through assets stolen from you and the others." I examined the detailed financial breakdown Torres had prepared, a comprehensive map of how Ryan had structured his theft operation. Each victim had been systematically targeted, their assets gradually extracted and converted through increasingly complex channels until they appeared as legitimate holdings in Ryan's portfolio. "The technical sophistication is remarkable," Torres continued. "Multiple shell corporations, tiered ownership structures, strategic use of offshore jurisdictions. This isn't something he developed independently." "Kazarian provided the infrastructure," Andrea added. "Ryan and others like him were essentially franchisees in a global operation. They identified and cultivated targets, while Kazarian's organization handled the financial engineering required to launder the proceeds." The scope of the operation continued to expand as investigators followed evidentiary threads. What had begun as an investigation into one man's betrayal had evolved into the unraveling of an international criminal enterprise. "The federal indictment includes 37 counts," Andrea explained, shifting to legal matters. "Wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, racketeering conspiracy, tax evasion, and financial institution fraud. If convicted on all counts, Ryan faces up to 40 years." "And with the evidence we've secured?" I asked. "Conviction is virtually certain," she confirmed. "The documentation is irrefutable, the witness testimony compelling, and his digital footprint extensive. His only hope for leniency is full cooperation against Kazarian. I absorbed this information with complicated emotions. The part of me that had discovered his betrayal wanted him to face the harshest possible consequences. Yet another part, the part that remembered building a life with someone I'd truly believed loved me, felt a faint, unwelcome echo of the connection we'd once shared. "He's requested another meeting," Andrea said carefully, observing my reaction. "Through proper channels this time. Full monitoring, recording, appropriate security protocols." "To what end?" I asked, my voice neutral. "He claims to have additional information about Kazarian's operation that he'll only share with you present. The prosecutors believe it's legitimate, something that doesn't appear in the evidence we've already obtained." I considered the implications, weighing potential, value against psychological cost. "When?" "Tomorrow morning, if you're willing. Federal building, maximum security protocols." I nodded slowly. "I'll be there." After Andrea and Torres departed, I walked through my gradually healing home, mentally preparing for the confrontation to come. Tomorrow, I would face Ryan directly, not as his unwitting victim, but as the architect of his downfall. 7 years of shared history, now revealed as an elaborate deception. 7 years of memories, permanently altered by the knowledge that his every action had been calculated manipulation. In my bedroom, I removed the diamond bracelet he'd given me 3 nights ago. The one I now knew had belonged to Stephanie Collins. Tomorrow, I would return it to its rightful owner, another small act of restoration in a situation that could never be fully remedied. As twilight settled over Portland, I stood on my back terrace, watching lights emerge across the city. Somewhere in the federal detention center, Ryan was contemplating the ruins of his scheme. Somewhere in the city, Kazarian's attorneys were desperately attempting to distance their client from the mounting evidence. And here I stood, in the home that had nearly been stolen from me, reclaiming not just physical property but personal agency, the power to define my own story rather than be defined by betrayal. Tomorrow would bring another chapter in this unfolding justice. Tonight was for quiet reflection and renewed resolve. The federal detention center maintained a deliberately sterile environment. Bare walls, utilitarian furniture, constant surveillance. Security protocols were extensively thorough, with multiple checkpoints and identity verifications before I was finally escorted to the visitation area. Andrea and Mark accompanied me, providing both legal oversight and personal support. Judge Garcia had authorized the meeting with specific parameters that ensured Ryan would have no opportunity for manipulation or coercion. When the secure door finally opened, Ryan entered escorted by 2 federal officers. The contrast between his current appearance and the man I had married was stark. His designer suits replaced by standard-issue khaki, his manicured appearance, showing signs of institutional living, the confident charm replaced by calculating wariness. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice maintaining that practiced tone that once seemed so sincere. "I know you have every reason to refuse." I studied him with clinical detachment, noting the carefully modulated body language, the deliberately vulnerable expression, the subtle manipulation techniques that had once seemed like authentic connection. "I'm here because you claim to have information about Kazarian's operation," I replied evenly. "Federal prosecutors are interested in any outstanding evidence." Ryan leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially despite the knowledge that every word was being recorded. "What they've found isn't everything, Jess. There's a secondary operation, properties beyond what's in the current evidence. Properties that aren't officially connected to Kazarian." "Such as?" Andrea prompted. "Luxury developments in Palm Springs, Scottsdale, Austin. Entire complexes funded with laundered money but structured through legitimate business channels. The documentation exists, but not in any of the locations that have been searched." Mark exchanged glances with Andrea, silently evaluating this new information. "Where is this documentation?" Mark asked directly. Ryan's eyes remained on me. secured location, biometric access, sequential authentication protocols. I'm prepared to provide complete cooperation, but I need certain considerations. You're not in a position to negotiate, I reminded him calmly. Federal asset forfeiture has already been authorized. Any undisclosed holdings constitute additional violations. This isn't about money, Ryan insisted, his expression shifting to what I recognized as his sincere performance. The information has significant value to the prosecution, but minimal financial impact on my situation. I'm offering it as a good faith gesture. In exchange for what? Andrea asked pointedly. Ryan hesitated, weighing his response. Recommendation of leniency during sentencing consideration, and he paused, manufacturing sincerity with practiced precision, a chance to explain myself to Jessica, privately. I studied the man I'd once agreed to marry, seeing clearly the calculated performance behind every gesture, every expression, every word. 7 years of my life spent with someone who had viewed our entire relationship as an elaborate con, who had weaponized intimacy as methodology for theft. The location information can be provided to federal investigators, I replied evenly. Any legitimate evidence will be processed through proper channels and incorporated into the prosecution. And my explanation? Ryan pressed, leaning forward. Don't you want to know why? Don't you have questions about us, about what was real? The trap was elegant in its simplicity, appealing to natural curiosity, to the human desire for closure, to the need to make sense of betrayal. Classic manipulation leveraging emotional vulnerability as access point. There is no us to discuss, I stated, my tone matter-of-fact rather than bitter. Any questions I had were answered through your actions, your communications with co-conspirators, and the documented pattern established with previous victims. Something flickered in Ryan's expression. Frustration at the failed manipulation attempt, recalculation of approach. He shifted strategies, with practiced fluidity. I did care for you, Jess, more than the others. That's why I hesitated, why the timeline extended longer than planned. Ask the federal investigators. They've seen the communications where Kazarian pressured me to complete the operation years ago. Operational delay doesn't indicate genuine emotion, I observed clinically. It simply reflects risk assessment and tactical adjustment based on circumstances. Ryan's mask slipped momentarily, revealing flashes of the calculation beneath, his performative vulnerability. He quickly reconstructed his expression, but the glimpse confirmed what I already knew. Everything remained tactical, even now. The secondary holdings information, Mark prompted, redirecting the conversation to its legitimate purpose. For several minutes, Ryan provided specific information about the concealed properties, location, access protocols, documentation storage. The federal officers documented everything while maintaining professional detachment. As the meeting concluded, Ryan made one final attempt at establishing emotional connection. When this is over, years from now, I hope you'll be open to hearing the full story. There were genuine moments, Jess. Not everything was calculated. I stood, gathering my materials without responding to his manufactured sentimentality. His need to believe some aspect of his deception transcended pure predation was ultimately irrelevant to me. The U.S. Attorney has been notified about these previously undisclosed assets, Andrea informed him. This meeting will be factored into their evaluation of your cooperation agreement. Outside the detention center, late morning sunlight illuminated the city with deceptive cheerfulness. I paused on the steps, breathing deeply as I formally concluded this chapter of engagement with the man who had attempted to steal not just my property, but years of my life. You handled that perfectly, Mark observed, his tone reflecting both professional approval and personal pride. Complete composure, no emotional engagement, perfect strategic balance. I nodded, emotion carefully contained behind professional facade. Have the investigators verify his information immediately. If it's legitimate, it significantly expands the prosecution's leverage against Kazarian. Already initiated, Andrea confirmed. Treasury agents are en route to the locations he identified. By mid-afternoon, federal authorities had confirmed Ryan's information was accurate. 3 luxury development projects worth approximately $180 million were indeed connected to Kazarian's operation through elaborately concealed financial channels. The evidence recovered established direct links between Kazarian and at least 12 separate fraud operations across 7 states. This significantly strengthens the federal case, Andrea explained during our debriefing at her office. The prosecutors are upgrading the indictment to include international conspiracy charges. Kazarian now faces potential life sentence if convicted on all counts. And Ryan's cooperation value? I asked. Substantial, but not determinative. His information accelerates the investigation, but most elements could have been eventually discovered through existing financial trails. The prosecutors are maintaining their original offer, 20 years with possibility of reduction to 15 based on continued cooperation and testimony. I absorbed this information with complicated emotions. Ryan would likely spend at least 15 years in federal prison, a significant consequence for his actions, yet somehow insufficient given the lives he had systematically destroyed. What about the other victims? I asked, shifting focus to what mattered most to me now. Andrea pulled up a secure file on her computer. Stephanie Collins arrives tomorrow to provide formal deposition. Treasury has confirmed recovery potential for approximately 60% of her assets. Melanie Ward's situation remains more complex, but federal seizures from Kazarian's accounts will provide significant restitution options. The other identified. Victims are being contacted systematically, with financial security measures implemented to prevent further losses. This represented the most meaningful outcome, not just punishment for the perpetrators, but restoration for the victims. Women who had lost everything might now recover substantial portions of their property and financial security. And the bungalow documentation? I asked. Completed restoration expected by end of week, Andrea confirmed. All original documents have been authenticated, cataloged, and prepared for return once evidence processing concludes. Judge Garcia has authorized expedited release given the historical and personal significance. As our meeting concluded, I prepared for the next phase of this ongoing process, meeting Stephanie Collins, the woman whose life Ryan had upended, before targeting me. Understanding her experience would provide valuable perspective while potentially helping her recovery process. Having successfully navigated an identical betrayal might prove invaluable to her healing. Dr. Landon, the victim advocate psychologist, had explained when suggesting the meeting, both as validation of her experience and demonstration that recovery is possible. The following morning, I met Stephanie at Emma's law office, neutral territory designed to provide both privacy and security. The woman who entered moved with the careful dignity of someone rebuilding herself after catastrophic loss. Approximately my age, with auburn hair cut in a practical bob, her business attire precisely professional, she carried herself with deliberate composure that I immediately recognized. The same controlled presentation I had adopted since discovering Ryan's betrayal. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she began after introductions were complete. When the federal agents contacted me, I couldn't quite believe what they were describing. After 3 years of questioning my own perception, having external validation is significant. I nodded, understanding completely. The gaslighting is almost more damaging than the theft, the systematic undermining of your trust in your own judgment. Exactly, Stephanie agreed, visible relief in her expression at being truly comprehended. Everyone thought I was paranoid or experiencing breakdown when I tried to explain what was happening. By the time I gathered enough evidence to be credible, most assets were already gone. For the next 2 hours, we compared experiences, identifying the precise parallels in Ryan's methodology. The initial charm offensive. The whirlwind romance accelerated to create emotional investment before due diligence. The gradual isolation from professional colleagues and personal support networks. The subtle undermining of financial confidence while simultaneously gaining access to accounts and documentation. He studies his targets extensively, Stephanie explained. Customizes his approach to exploit specific vulnerabilities. With me, it was my recent divorce and professional insecurities. He positioned himself as the supportive partner who believed in my capabilities while systematically eroding my actual decision-making authority. I nodded, recognizing the pattern. For me, it was my parents' accident. He appeared just when I was most vulnerable, presenting himself as stabilizing influence while methodically accessing family holdings I was still processing emotionally. Sharing these experiences provided powerful catharsis for both of us, transforming individual victimization into collective understanding. What had seemed like personal failure became recognizable as textbook methodology employed by skilled predators. The prosecutors want me to testify, Stephanie noted as our conversation shifted to legal matters. Establish pattern evidence for sentencing considerations. Are you prepared for that? I asked, knowing the emotional toll such testimony would exact. 3 years ago, no. Now? She straightened, determination evident in her posture. Absolutely. He doesn't get to hide what he did. None of them do. I reached into my bag and removed the velvet box containing the diamond bracelet Ryan had given me. The bracelet I now knew had been taken from Stephanie during their relationship. This belongs to you, I said simply, sliding it across the table. The FBI confirmed provenance through purchase records. It was never Ryan's to give. Stephanie stared at the box without opening it, complex emotions crossing her features, recognition, anger, and finally resolute calm. Keep it, she said finally, or sell it and donate the proceeds to organizations that help women rebuild after financial abuse. I don't want anything connected to that period of my life. I'm building something new now. Her response resonated deeply with my own emerging perspective. The bracelet wasn't just jewelry, it was symbolic of a larger pattern of exploitation and deception. Its value lay not in its diamonds, but in its evidentiary significance, proof of how predators convert human trust into fungible commodity. Is it strange, Stephanie asked after a moment, that despite everything, there are moments I miss who I thought he was? Logically, I know that person never existed, but emotionally. The grief is real, I acknowledged, even when the relationship was false. We're mourning the future we believed in, not the man who engineered its destruction. As our meeting concluded, we established ongoing communication channels. Stephanie's perspective as someone 3 years further into recovery provided valuable insight into the emotional journey that lay ahead, while my active involvement in the prosecution offered her long-deferred justice. There's one more thing. You should know, I said as we prepared to leave. The federal investigation has identified at least 7 other women targeted by Ryan and Kazarian's operation. Most escaped before significant asset loss, but all experienced the same psychological manipulation. Would you be willing to participate in a recovery network for these women? Stephanie's response was immediate and resolute. Absolutely. Breaking the isolation is the first step toward healing. Together, we're not just victims, we're witnesses, evidence, and ultimately the architects of justice. 1 week after Ryan's arrest, I sat in Judge Garcia's chambers reviewing the expanding case against him and Kazarian. What had begun as property, fraud investigation had evolved into one of the largest financial crimes prosecutions in the district's history. Treasury Department has identified over $300 million in connected assets, Judge Garcia explained, reviewing the latest federal findings. Kazarian's operation extended well beyond real estate fraud, into securities manipulation, tax evasion, and international money laundering. And Ryan's role? I asked, examining the organizational chart prosecutors had assembled. More significant than initially understood. Financial forensics indicate he wasn't merely Kazarian's operative. He helped design the targeting methodology. Judge Garcia's expression hardened as he continued. They developed algorithms to identify potential victims based on specific vulnerability factors, recent loss or trauma, professional accomplishment, financial independence, minimal family connections. Then customized manipulation strategies based on psychological profiles. The clinical description couldn't mask the predatory reality. Ryan had systematically hunted successful professional women, analyzing their financial positions, personal circumstances, and psychological profiles to optimize exploitation potential. What about recovery for the victims? I asked, focusing on what mattered most. Judge Garcia shuffled through the case files. Treasury Department has established a dedicated asset recovery unit specifically for this case. Initial projections suggest between 60 and 80% recovery potential for most identified victims, depending on jurisdictional complexities and asset liquidity. 3 previously unknown victims had also been identified. Women whose cases hadn't progressed as far as Stephanie's or mine, but who had experienced early stages of Ryan's methodology. Each had confirmed identical relationship patterns: initial meeting at professional events, whirlwind romance, strategic privacy about his finances combined with careful study of theirs. The systematic nature of Ryan's operations somehow made the betrayal simultaneously more and less personal. I hadn't been specifically targeted because of who I was, but rather what I owned and represented. The violation remained intimate while the motivation was clinically mercenary. At noon, Jackson arrived with updates from the federal task force continuing to process evidence from the Tualatin facility. They've located documentation connected to planned future targets, he reported grimly. Preliminary profiles on at least 12 women across the Pacific Northwest, all successful professionals with significant property holdings. Do I know any of them? I asked, wondering how far Ryan's networking at social events had extended beyond simple charm. Jackson hesitated before sliding a folder across the table. 3 were guests at your holiday party last December. Ryan apparently used social gatherings to conduct initial assessments. The realization that he had been prospecting for future victims in my home, among my friends and colleagues, sent a fresh wave of revulsion through me. His betrayal extended beyond our relationship to weaponize my entire social network. Have they been notified? Judge Garcia asked. Treasury Department is handling notifications through financial security advisors, Jackson confirmed. Discreet approach to minimize personal distress while ensuring their assets are secured. By mid-afternoon, I visited Olivia Thompson to review findings from Portland Trust and Financial's internal investigation into Thomas Brooks and Gregory Wilson. The prestigious institution's executive conference room felt appropriate for the gravity of their conclusions. Wilson has been terminated and reported to banking regulatory authorities, Olivia informed me, sliding formal documentation across the polished table. Our forensic audit identified 23 instances where he facilitated improper documentation through Brooks. The bank has established a victim compensation fund for affected clients. And the other paralegals connected to Brooks? I asked. 2 have been terminated from their respective firms. The 3rd is cooperating with federal investigators. Olivia's expression reflected professional determination to address systemic vulnerabilities. We're implementing new authentication protocols across all property transactions and establishing an ethics review committee with independent oversight. The institutional response was encouraging, not merely addressing individual bad actors, but recognizing and remedying the systemic weaknesses that had enabled their operations. From Portland Trust and Financial, I proceeded to the Thompson Foundation, closing the legitimate business that had continued despite personal upheaval. The elderly client greeted me with unexpected warmth. "Judge Garcia told me what happened," Margaret Thompson confided, patting my hand. "My herald always said you reminded him of your grandmother. Same steel beneath the graciousness." The closing proceeded efficiently, the $8 million transaction executing flawlessly despite Ryan's attempts to compromise it. As I completed the final documentation, I reflected on the professional integrity that had remained unshaken despite personal betrayal. By evening, I returned to my bungalow, now fully secured with state-of-the-art protection systems. The house felt different, not just because of new security measures or the lingering awareness of violation, but because I viewed it through transformed perspective. In my grandmother's study, her portrait had been restored to its proper place. The antique secretary repaired where Ryan had damaged the locking mechanism. Family photographs once again lining the walls, documenting generations of Millers who had preserved this legacy. Jackson arrived as I was reviewing restoration work in the wine cellar, bringing updates on Ryan's legal proceedings. "He's accepted the plea agreement," Jackson reported. 20 years with possibility of reduction to 15 based on cooperation value, asset forfeiture including all personal accounts, investment holdings, and property acquired through criminal proceeds. "Which means everything," I noted, since his entire financial existence was built on fraud. "Complete financial dissolution," Jackson confirmed. "The Audi, designer wardrobe, even the watch collection he was so proud of, all purchased with proceeds from previous victims, all subject to forfeiture." There was justice in this comprehensive dismantling. The man who had systematically stolen from others now stripped of everything he had accumulated, the architect of financial destruction facing total asset forfeiture himself. "He's requested another meeting with you," Jackson added carefully. "Through his attorney this time, following proper protocols." "Did he indicate purpose?" "Claims to have information about additional documentation you might want recovered." Jackson's skepticism was evident. "Could be manipulation attempt. Could be legitimate." I moved to the bay window overlooking the garden my grandmother had designed, considering options with clear-eyed assessment rather than emotional reaction. "Schedule it," I decided. "Full security protocols, recorded, with Mark present. Let's hear what he has to say." The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon. Another sterile room in the federal building, another carefully managed interaction with the man who had systematically deceived me for 7 years. Ryan appeared more institutional than during our previous encounter, the superficial polish further eroded by detention reality. Despite this, he maintained calculated conversational approach, attempting to establish artificial rapport before addressing substantive matters. "Thank you for agreeing to meet again," he began with practiced sincerity. "I know how difficult this must be." I maintained professional detachment, neither rejecting nor reciprocating his attempts at connection. "You indicated having information about additional documentation," I prompted, keeping focus on legitimate purpose rather than emotional manipulation. Ryan leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the obvious recording equipment. "What's been recovered isn't everything, Jess. There are other documents, personal items that weren't processed through Tualatin, things with sentimental value, beyond their financial worth." "Such as?" I asked, maintaining neutral expression. "Your grandmother's journals. The original architectural plans from 1918. Family correspondence from the Mount St. Helens eruption period." My expression remained controlled, though inwardly I acknowledged the painful accuracy of his assessment. These were precisely the items whose loss would distress me most, the irreplaceable documentation of family history that transcended mere property value. "Where are these items?" Mark interjected, maintaining procedural focus. Ryan's eyes remained on me. "I have a secured storage location. Contents accessible only with specific access codes and authentication. I'm prepared to provide complete information with certain considerations." You're not in position to negotiate, I reminded him calmly. Federal asset forfeiture has already been authorized. Any undisclosed holdings constitute additional violations. This isn't about money, Ryan insisted. The contents have no financial value to anyone but you. I'm offering to ensure their return in exchange for your recommendation of leniency during sentencing. I studied the man I'd once agreed to marry, seeing clearly the calculated performance behind every word. Even now, facing decades in federal prison, he attempted to leverage what should have been freely given: the return of irreplaceable family, treasures he had no right to possess. The storage information can be provided to federal investigators, I replied evenly. Any legitimate personal items will be processed through proper evidence channels and returned if appropriate. This was not the response Ryan had anticipated. His expression flickered momentarily. Recalculation, frustration, revised approach. There's something else, he continued, voice modulated to project vulnerability. Something I need to explain. About us, about what happened. Don't you want to understand why? I recognized the tactic immediately, pivoting to emotional manipulation when practical leverage failed, creating artificial scarcity of closure, as if understanding his motivations would somehow mitigate the damage he had inflicted. Your motivations have been thoroughly documented through evidence recovery, I stated calmly. Financial gain, systematic exploitation of trust, participation in organized criminal enterprise. The psychological assessments in your files regarding previous targets provided comprehensive insight into your operational methodology. Ryan's carefully constructed facade slipped momentarily, revealing frustration that his manipulative techniques no longer affected me. He quickly recovered, shifting to his final approach. I know I've caused damage that can't be repaired, he acknowledged, manufacturing apparent sincerity. But there were moments, real moments, between us. You must have felt that too. I met his gaze directly, maintaining complete emotional composure. What I felt was based on systematic deception. The relationship I believed existed was a tactical construction designed for asset acquisition. Your operational documents explicitly outlined relationship progression timelines aligned with progressive property access. This clinical deconstruction of his emotional connection narrative visibly unsettled him. Without emotional engagement to manipulate, his scripts became ineffective. The storage facility information, Mark prompted, redirecting to practical matters. For several minutes, Ryan provided detailed information about the concealed location, access protocols, and inventory contents. Federal agents documented everything while maintaining professional detachment. As the meeting concluded, Ryan made one final attempt at establishing artificial connection. When this is over, years from now, I hope you'll be open to understanding the full story. Not everything was calculation, Jess. Some things were real. I stood, gathering my materials without responding to his manufactured sentimentality. His need to believe some aspect of his deception transcended pure predation was ultimately irrelevant to me. The U.S. Attorney has been notified about this previously undisclosed storage location, Mark informed him formally. This meeting will be factored into their evaluation of your cooperation agreement. Outside the federal building, afternoon sunlight illuminated the city in golden hues. I paused on the steps, breathing deeply as I formally concluded this chapter of engagement with the man who had attempted to steal not just my property, but years of my life. Perfect composure, Mark observed with quiet approval. You gave him nothing to manipulate. He's still attempting to create leverage through artificial scarcity, I noted, parceling out information to maintain contact and relevance. Classic narcissistic response to loss of control, Mark agreed, but completely ineffective given our comprehensive evidence collection. That evening, federal agents recovered the contents of Ryan's hidden storage facility precisely as described, containing family documentation dating back generations. The materials joined the growing evidence collection while being processed, for eventual return. I spent the following weekend at my bungalow, systematically reclaiming spaces that had been violated. In my grandmother's study, I restored family photographs to their proper places, rearranged furniture to configurations that felt right rather than staged for Ryan's approval, and began the process of establishing new security, both physical and emotional. 1 month after Ryan's arrest, I hosted a gathering for those who had supported me throughout the ordeal: Emma, Jackson, Mark, Andrea, Olivia Thompson, and other allies who had helped dismantle Ryan's operation. We convened not in my formal dining room, but in the kitchen, that had always been the heart of the Miller family home. "The federal prosecutor called today," Mark announced as we shared dinner. "Based on evidence provided by Ryan and corroborated through independent sources, they've identified 4 additional operations targeting professional women across the western states. Federal coordination has already prevented 3 potential victims from loss." This represented the most meaningful outcome: not just justice for past victims, but prevention of future harm. The system Ryan had helped design was now being used to dismantle similar operations and protect potential targets. "To reclamation," Emma offered, raising her glass in toast. "Of property, of trust, of justice." As crystal glasses clinked in unified purpose, I surveyed these powerful, principled professionals gathered in my reclaimed home. Ryan had targeted me for perceived vulnerability as a successful woman with significant assets. Instead, he had unwittingly selected an adversary uniquely positioned to dismantle not just his operation, but the entire criminal enterprise behind it. The home that had nearly been stolen now served as headquarters for an emerging victim advocacy network, with Stephanie and I working alongside federal authorities to develop enhanced protection protocols for women specifically targeted by financial predators. The betrayal that was meant to destroy me had instead catalyzed a powerful coalition dedicated to systemic change. Ryan would spend the next 2 decades in federal prison, his criminal associates dismantled, his stolen assets returned to their rightful owners. And I would continue rebuilding, not just my life, but the lives of others who had experienced similar violation. The most meaningful justice wasn't merely punitive, but restorative, creating stronger protection against future predation. That was the ultimate victory, transforming personal trauma into collective empowerment, ensuring that those who targeted women for their success would find not vulnerability, but coordinated strength waiting in response. 6 months after Ryan's arrest, I stood at the podium in the federal courthouse press room, surrounded by the representatives of 12 women who had been targeted by the Kazarian network. The Treasury Department's asset recovery operation had officially concluded its primary phase, with historic results that would transform how these cases were handled moving forward. Today marks an unprecedented milestone in financial justice, announced Catherine Weber, the lead federal prosecutor. Through the coordinated efforts of multiple agencies, we have recovered and redistributed over $218 million in stolen assets to the victims of the Kazarian Miller fraud operation. This represents an 83% recovery rate, the highest in any major financial fraud case in the district's history. The assembled journalists frantically documented this remarkable outcome, cameras flashing as Weber continued. These results would not have been possible without the extraordinary courage and determination of Jessica Miller, whose systematic dismantling of her husband's operation provided the blueprint for our entire investigation. I shared a knowing glance with Stephanie Collins, who stood at my side along with Melanie Ward and 9 other women who had gone from victims to powerful advocates over the past half year. Together, we had formed the Phoenix Coalition, a nonprofit organization dedicated to identifying, preventing, and prosecuting targeted financial predation against professional women. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my remarks focused on the systemic changes our case had catalyzed rather than personal vindication. Today's announcement isn't merely about financial restitution, though that remains vitally important. It represents a fundamental shift in how these crimes are understood and prosecuted. What was once dismissed as relationship disputes or civil matters is now properly recognized as organized, predatory criminal enterprise. I gestured to the women beside me, attorneys, physicians, executives, entrepreneurs, all of whom had been methodically targeted for their professional success. The Phoenix Coalition has identified specific vulnerability markers that financial institutions, real estate agencies, and regulatory bodies can now monitor for potential exploitation. Early detection protocols have already prevented an estimated $42 million in potential losses across 14 jurisdictions. What I didn't mention was the personal cost each of us had paid, the trust destroyed, the relationships shattered, the emotional aftermath that couldn't be quantified in monetary terms. Those aspects remained personal journeys we supported each other through in private sessions, away from cameras and public scrutiny. As the press conference concluded, Weber pulled me aside with news that hadn't been publicly announced. Kazarian accepted the enhanced plea agreement this morning, she informed me quietly. 35 years with no possibility of parole, complete asset forfeiture, comprehensive cooperation against his international network. I nodded, absorbing this development with complex emotions. The architect of so much destruction would effectively spend the remainder of his life in prison. The justice was appropriate, yet somehow incomplete. No punishment could truly restore what had been taken. From so many women, and Ryan's sentencing? I asked, referring to the hearing scheduled for the following week. His cooperation has been substantive, Weber acknowledged. The judge will likely honor the recommendation of 17 years with standard behavior, reductions, effective minimum of 14 years served. It was less than I believed he deserved, but the broader outcomes, the dismantling of the entire network, the recovery of assets, the prevention of future victimization, provided more meaningful justice than any single prison sentence could convey. Back at my bungalow that evening, I hosted a smaller gathering of the Phoenix Coalition leadership, the core group of women who had transformed individual victimization into collective action. We congregated in my grandmother's fully restored study, the room once violated now reclaimed as strategic headquarters for our ongoing work. The Banking Oversight Committee approved our enhanced verification protocols, reported Christine Baker, a former hedge fund manager who had narrowly escaped Ryan's colleague in Seattle. Implementation begins next quarter across all federally regulated institutions. Real Estate Association adopted our identification framework, added Melanie, who had rebuilt her career in property development after nearly losing everything to Ryan 3 years earlier. Every agent in the Western region will receive mandatory training in recognizing predatory acquisition patterns. These systemic changes represented the most meaningful outcome of our collective ordeal, transforming individual trauma into structural protection for countless women who would never know how close they came to similar victimization. As conversation shifted to personal matters, Stephanie addressed the question that had been lingering since the Treasury Department's recovery announcement. "What are you doing with your portion of the seized assets?" she asked me. "Most of us are reinvesting in the properties we nearly lost, but your situation is different." Indeed, my circumstance was unique among the victims. Because I had discovered Ryan's scheme before he completed the property transfers, my financial recovery had been relatively complete. The additional $2.8 million allocated from seized Kazarian assets represented unexpected restoration rather than necessary survival. "I've established a legal defense fund," I explained, "for women without our resources who find themselves fighting similar battles. Full representation, forensic accounting support, security services, everything we had access to that made our justice possible." The fund had already taken 3 cases in partnership with Emma's law firm, providing comprehensive support to women whose situations might otherwise have been dismissed as simple relationship disputes rather than recognized as systematic fraud. That's the key difference, observed Dr. Rebecca Hayes, our coalition's psychological consultant. Financial predators count on isolation and inadequate resources. When women have access to coordinated professional support, the predatory patterns become immediately recognizable and defensible. After the others departed, I walked through my fully restored home, acknowledging the transformation that had occurred not just in physical space, but in my fundamental understanding of trust, relationship, and personal agency. The violation that had nearly destroyed me had instead catalyzed profound growth and unexpected purpose. In my bedroom, I opened the small journal I had begun keeping after Ryan's arrest, not to document the betrayal, but to track the rebuilding process. Each entry marked another milestone in reclamation. The first night I slept peacefully in my home again, the first professional victory after the case, the first genuine laugh shared with friends without shadowing darkness. The latest entry acknowledged a significant personal development. I had agreed to have dinner with Thomas Lancaster, a prosecutor from the Treasury Department whose integrity and commitment to justice had impressed me throughout the investigation. Not a date, precisely, but a deliberate step toward opening possibilities I had firmly closed after Ryan's betrayal. The decision hadn't come easily. The psychological armor I'd developed was both protection and limitation. Trust, once shattered, couldn't be casually reconstructed. Yet complete isolation represented another form of victimization, allowing Ryan's betrayal to dictate my future capacity for connection. My grandmother's wisdom echoed in memory. Security isn't the absence of vulnerability, Jessica. It's having the strength to risk opening yourself after knowing exactly what can be lost. The next morning, I visited the courthouse for a meeting with Judge Garcia, who had overseen critical aspects of the case from the beginning. Now, in his final month before retirement, he had requested this private consultation regarding the legacy, aspects of what had become known as the Kazarian-Miller precedent. The structural changes you've initiated extend far beyond individual justice, he observed as we reviewed implementation documentation for the new financial protocols. You've created a template for identifying and dismantling similar operations nationwide. I nodded, acknowledging the unexpected scope of what had begun as personal self-defense. The pattern recognition was key. Once we established the targeting criteria and operational methodology, similar cases emerged across multiple jurisdictions. Which brings me to my proposal, Judge Garcia continued. The Judicial Conference is establishing a specialized task force focused on organized financial crimes targeting specific demographic groups. They've asked me to recommend leadership candidates before my retirement. The implication was clear and momentarily overwhelming. What had begun as personal survival had evolved into professional redirection. My expertise in financial analysis, combined with direct experience of the Kazarian operation, created unique qualification for shaping how these cases would be handled throughout the federal system. It would mean transitioning from private practice, I acknowledged, considering the implications, and establishing residence in Washington part-time. Judge Garcia nodded. Significant changes, certainly, but perhaps aligned with the work you've already begun through the Phoenix Coalition. I didn't provide an immediate answer, recognizing the decision required careful consideration of multiple factors. The opportunity to implement systemic protection at national scale was compelling, yet would necessarily shift focus from the individual support work that had proven so meaningful. Later that afternoon, I visited my grandmother's grave for the first time since before Ryan's arrest. The peaceful cemetery overlooked the Columbia River, its grounds meticulously maintained with flowering trees now in full spring bloom. I almost lost your house, I said quietly, placing fresh flowers beside her headstone. But in fighting to keep it, I found something I never expected. The journey from victim to advocate had transformed not just my professional direction, but my fundamental understanding of purpose. The skills I had developed throughout my career, analytical precision, financial pattern recognition, strategic planning, had found perfect application in dismantling predatory operations and protecting vulnerable individuals. Ryan had targeted me precisely because of my professional success, viewing it as vulnerability to be exploited. Instead, those same capabilities had become the instruments of his destruction and the foundation for systemic change that would protect countless women he would never meet. As I stood to leave, my phone chimed with a notification from the Phoenix Coalition's early warning system. A potential matching pattern had been identified in financial transactions affecting 3 professional women in the Chicago area. The algorithm we had developed based on the Khazarian operation had flagged suspicious activities requiring immediate assessment. This was the most meaningful justice, transforming individual trauma into collective protection, ensuring that future predators would encounter not isolation but coordinated resistance. Ryan had unwittingly created the blueprint for his own obsolescence. 1 week later, I sat in the federal courtroom for Ryan's sentencing hearing. The proceeding was largely procedural. His plea agreement had established the parameters, with only minor discretion remaining for the judge. Still, I felt compelled to witness this final formal conclusion to the legal process. Ryan entered in standard detention attire, the superficial charm now completely eroded by months in federal custody. When permitted to speak, he delivered a carefully constructed statement of remorse that contained all the appropriate phrases while conveying none of the genuine acceptance of responsibility. "Classic cognitive dissonance," whispered Dr. Hayes, who had accompanied me for professional support. "He's constructed a narrative where he's simultaneously penitent and victimized, completely consistent with malignant narcissism." When the judge announced the 17-year sentence with standard behavior provisions, Ryan's expression remained carefully neutral, though I detected the momentary tightening around his eyes that indicated calculation rather than acceptance. As he was escorted from the courtroom, Ryan glanced in my direction, a final attempted communication that I met with impassive observation rather than emotional engagement. Whatever he sought, forgiveness, connection, acknowledgement, remained his burden rather than my obligation. Outside the courthouse, reporters awaited comment on the sentencing. Rather than focusing on Ryan, I redirected attention to the broader significance of the case. Today's proceeding represents one necessary component of justice, but the more meaningful outcomes are already in progress, I explained. The structural protections implemented through the Phoenix Coalition, the Treasury Department's enhanced recovery protocols, and the Judicial Conference's new specialized approach ensure that future operations will be identified earlier, dismantled more completely, and prosecuted more effectively. As cameras flashed, I continued with the message that defined our coalition's core purpose. Financial predators target successful women precisely because of their professional accomplishments. What was once vulnerability has now become strength through collective action. The very qualities that make women targets, financial acumen, professional achievement, independent decision-making, are now being deployed to dismantle these predatory networks before they can cause harm. That evening, as spring twilight settled over Portland, I hosted a small gathering at my bungalow to mark what felt like the true conclusion of this chapter. Emma, Jackson, Mark, Stephanie, and the core team who had supported my journey from victim to advocate shared quiet celebration of both justice served and protection established. "The Chicago pattern has been confirmed," Jackson reported, updating us on the early warning alert. Treasury Department intervened this morning, 3 women's assets secured, potential losses exceeding $7 million prevented. This represented the ultimate victory. Transformation of personal trauma into systemic change. Prevention rather than merely punishment. Protection extending to women I would never meet, but whose lives would continue uninterrupted because of what we had built. From the ruins of betrayal. As conversation shifted to the Phoenix Coalition's expanding initiatives, I stepped onto my back terrace, taking a moment to appreciate the garden my grandmother had designed, now flourishing in early bloom. The bungalow that had nearly been stolen now served as headquarters for work that extended far beyond its walls, a center for reclamation rather than loss. Emma joined me, recognizing my need for momentary reflection. "Your grandmother would be incredibly proud," she said quietly. "Not just that you saved her house, but what you've built because of the fight." I nodded, acknowledging the truth in her observation. What had begun as desperate defense of inherited property had evolved into creation of a legacy far more significant than the building itself. "I've accepted Judge Garcia's proposal," I told her, making the decision final by speaking it aloud. "The judicial conference position begins next month. I'll split time between here and Washington." Emma smiled, unsurprised. "The perfect application of your skills at national scale. Though I imagine the Phoenix Coalition will keep you busy regardless of location." "We're expanding to 7 cities next quarter," I confirmed. "Local chapters implementing the protection framework with centralized support." Inside, laughter erupted from the gathering. Survivors who had transformed victimization into powerful advocacy, professionals whose expertise now served collective protection rather than individual defense. The home that had been targeted, for its value, now housed something far more precious: the foundation for systemic change. Ryan had selected me as target precisely because I appeared isolated in my success. A professional woman with significant assets and minimal protective network. His fundamental miscalculation wasn't underestimating my personal resilience, but failing to recognize the potential coalition his predation would ultimately create. In targeting me, he had unwittingly selected the architect of his own destruction and the comprehensive dismantling of the entire criminal enterprise that supported him. The very qualities he'd intended to exploit: financial expertise, analytical precision, professional connections, had instead become instruments of complete justice. As twilight deepened toward evening, I rejoined the gathering in my grandmother's study, the heart of the home now restored and repurposed as center for transformation. The journey from victim to advocate hadn't erased the trauma of betrayal, but had integrated it into a larger narrative of reclamation and purpose. Ryan would spend the next 14 years in federal prison, Khazarian the remainder of his life. Their criminal network had been comprehensively dismantled, their assets redistributed to their intended victims. Yet the most meaningful justice wasn't punishment, but prevention. The systems now in place to protect countless women from similar predation. That was the ultimate victory, transforming personal violation into collective protection, ensuring that those who targeted women for their success would find not vulnerability, but coordinated strength waiting in response. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.